Welcome. Make your way on to Three Guys in an iPad, the proverbial water cooler of the mortgage industry. And I am Brian Rieger. I'm one of those three guys. I'm joined as always by my faithful compatriot, Rick Grant of RGA PR and Content Beacon. Rick, welcome.
Thank you, Brian. It's good to see you as always.
Oh, good to be seen, Rick. Good to be seen. And Kevin Breeland is with us as well. Kevin coming to us from Austin, Texas with Amplify Credit Union. Kevin, how are you today?
I'm doing fine, Rick. Thank you for asking. I thought I would give you a shot of the Austin skyline and let you know that yesterday we had our first 100 degree day, but we had a cold front. So today it's only 94.
Outstanding. You guys want to get out and enjoy the weather if you can, huh? So, well, of course, today I'm going to make our brief plug quickly here for Content Beacon, the first and only true B2B content marketing agency in the mortgage industry. If you're watching us on our Content Beacon page or even on our YouTube channel, we're always looking for guests. We're always looking for new ideas, or if you'd even like to be on the show yourself, just reach out. I'm at brian@contentbeacon.com, or you can reach Rick at rick@contentbeacon.com. But enough about me. Let's get to our two very special guests today. Our first guest has been with us before, and we're thrilled to have him back. Well, he is, of course, the past president of Ginnie Mae in 2008, 2009. He's also, through his career, served as, he's currently chairman emeritus at Chrysalis Holdings. Over his career, he has been the chairman of JJAM Financial Services. He's been a CEO at Lenders Service Inc., LSI. He's also, I believe, a co-founder of Collingwood Group, and we are really thrilled to have him. Joe Murin, welcome back.
Thank you very much, Brian. It's a pleasure doing it again.
Oh, we'll have you on as often as you'll have us, Joe, that's for sure. And we have a new guest today, another very special guest, and another one with a great history, one of the true thought leaders in the industry. I'm talking about Patrick Stone, and Patrick is currently the executive chairman and founder of Williston Financial Group. In his past, he's been the vice chairman of Metro Cities Mortgage, which was a top 20 lender in 2005. He's been the chairman of the Stone Group in Austin, Texas. That's a tenant rep brokerage company down in Austin. He's currently on the boards of the Nassau Reinsurance, Tran Modus, Tristing Tree Golf Club, and Inman News. And he's been honored several times in our industry. Inman News named him one of their 100 most influential people in real estate in 2013. He was one of the top 101 real estate doers in 2015, both Inman Awards. And then Housing Wire, as recently as 2019, named him a Vanguard Award recipient. Finally, Patrick's involved with multiple philanthropies. He's been the chairman of the Santa Barbara Art Museum, director of the Portland Art Museum. He is a past chairman of Oregon State University Foundation and continues to be heavily involved there, I believe. He was the co-chair of the college's $1 billion capital campaign. Wow, Patrick Stone, it's a pleasure to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Brian. I'm delighted to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and everybody involved.
Great. And with that, let's get right to it, gentlemen. I'm going to throw this one out to both of you. Either one of you can jump in. And, it's the question we've asked a lot of folks, but I think you guys have some great opinions on this. So let's get right to it. How well do you believe the mortgage industry as a whole, and then maybe specifically for you, Patrick or Joe, the title industry, how well have they managed or are they managing the epidemic and its impact on the economy? What could we have done better? What did we do best? That sort of thing.
Well, I'm going to let Joe talk about the mortgage industry, but I'll tell you the title industry, I think, has done surprisingly well. There were some hiccups early on because of closed courthouses. There was some disruption in outsourcing when India shut down. But I think the title industry has adjusted fairly well to it. And I think that the end result of this is it's raised everybody's awareness of the need to embrace technology, to integrate with other participants in the process, and to make this process a hell of a lot more streamlined for the benefit of the consumer. Now, the title industry has accommodated a lot of closings, curb closings, very safe, sanitized closings in closing offices, and used Ron, Ren, and Avon, which are electronic and online notarization, and used that to a degree, but I think that this pandemic has also showed us that we're nowhere near where we need to be in terms of embracing technology and making the process better.
Joe, how about you?
Well, I don't think there were many, if very few, that had a pandemic policy in place. One of the things that if you're familiar with having a SOC 2 type 2 type of audit done on your company, and I am, because I've been involved in one for the past 4 or 5 years. One of the requirements is having a pandemic policy, and I think that has helped an awful lot for a lot of reasons, because it makes you aware of what you need to do during a period of time like this. So I think there were very, very few companies that had them in place. I noticed a lot of companies had to scramble to go mobilize into their own homes with their operations. It cost them a lot of money to go mobilize because they weren't prepared for it. But the good thing about this is, number one, we had a 0.05 10-year. We have a lot of activity on the refi front, which by any stretch of the imagination helps anybody. I mean, there's got to be something wrong if you're not making a few bucks during this period of time. I didn't know how delicately I could say that, but I think that's true. And it's just, I just think that the mortgage industry, and not to mention the fact that the Treasury came out and says, oh, we definitely need the mortgage industry, which really helped because everybody continued to work, which was a blessing for a lot of folks because they didn't miss a beat. And I think, though, this has brought a lot of attention to a lot of companies understanding the what ifs. And we talked about this, I think, a lot last time I was on your show, that very, very few people in the industry look at the what ifs. And they really should. They have to prepare for the what ifs, and they generally don't. So I hope this was a lesson learned.
Well, I was just going to ask that, Joe, and then I'll follow with you, Patrick, as well. Do you think the lesson's been learned? Do you think there's a lot of lasting change to come out of this? And of course, when I say come out of this, we may not be entirely finished with it yet either. There may be future phases, but do you think there's going to be lasting change, or do you think this was just kind of an accommodation?
Well, I would say there probably has been some realization that some folks have to do things, but when your industry continues to work when other industries aren't working, and your people are still eating when a lot of people aren't eating, it doesn't make you focus on the fact that those people over here are scrounging to make a buck and try to figure out what the hell they're doing. I love the industry, don't get me wrong, and you know how I feel about the industry as a whole, but it really takes great leadership in organizations to be able to understand and adapt to what needs to be done, and understand the blessings that they have as an industry that everybody needs a roof over their head. We're in a great industry because we provide that service. And so you really have to take that into consideration when you're looking at what you have, what you need to do. And I think the great leaders take care of it and others don't. And I think we have a long way to go, but I think it in fact has helped a lot of folks, but not as many as I would have liked.
And let's be real candid here. A great deal of our industry is highly regulated. So it is by nature adverse to change. It does not embrace change readily. Some people will say it's sunk cost in technology or sunk cost in process. But the reality is our industry does not change easily, and it does not change readily. And there is an aversion to change because of the environment we're in. And, I'll tell you just a quick funny story. In 1999, when NISMO was enacted, I thought the world was going to change. I thought because we had a standard data set that we were going to start integrating. I spent a lot of money betting on the come. Nothing changed. We had the 2008 to 2010 recession, and I started this company because of that recession, thinking that we were going to have significant change in cost and in our ability to charge fees and premiums. Been able to make the company very successful, but actually my assumption then didn't hold true. So I'm just telling you, and I think Joe and I are getting to a point in our lives where we've seen the movie many times. Change doesn't happen easily. And I think there will be minimal change. Those that do change and embrace technology, make their process more effective, and as Joe said, make sure that they plan ahead, they will do fine. Those that don't won't.
And Patrick, we're going to come back. You mentioned starting Williston Financial Group back in 2008 and around that time, well, actually around 2009, 2010. We're going to come back and ask you more about that. But I believe Kevin had a follow-up here. Kevin, you had a question too?
Yeah, I would. I would like both of y'all's input in regard to this. As a 41-year veteran in the mortgage business, I've seen a lot of ebb and flows, and I think this is the fifth ebb and flow I've been through. The thing that strikes me different, and it started in 2008, and it's been pretty consistent since then, is the impact of the Federal Reserve in the MBS markets. And, we haven't had a lot of private enterprise in that arena for quite a while. And it doesn't look like we're going to have any private enterprise back in it in the near term. So would it be your belief that that the Federal Reserve is just going to continue to be a buyer of assets? And I mean, it seems to be the strategy that they're employing to help keep the mortgage aspect alive and well.
I was, again, I was in office when this happened in 08, 09, and without the Federal Reserve stepping in, we wouldn't have an industry like we have today. Mm-hmm. I'm heavily involved in a public REIT, and I can tell you that the board was on call every day for a period of almost 30 days when this happened just a few months ago. And if it wouldn't have been for one of my old colleagues, a guy who used to work for me, is he's got a nice position over at the Treasury now. And I talked to him and I said, when's the Fed going to step in? Because, they're the only ones big enough to make that kind of an impact. And he said, well, my friend, we're hoping that it's over the weekend, but if it doesn't, we're going to have a hell of a situation at our front door. And fortunately, in the middle of the night, I think it was Monday morning early, they stepped in, and it changed the course because everybody was getting, a margin call. They were bleeding, cash. And I just think, and to take this one step further, everybody criticized the Fed back in 08 and 09 for stepping in and buying the assets, and they're going to lose money, they're going to lose this, they're going to lose that. Hellfire and brimstone, but they didn't. They did well with it, and I think the same thing's going to happen again. And it's an incredible safety net that we're fortunate enough to have in this industry, because I can't imagine this industry without it.
I would echo Joe's comments and totally agree with him. We've been very, very fortunate that Powell and the Fed has been aggressive as it has been. It kept the markets liquid and backstopped everything. Right. And without it, we've been in a lot of trouble. Your comments about, your comments about lack of a private market. If you talk to people on Wall Street, the securitization of mortgages has not been very attractive because of what the interest rates are. And now that may change, but I think right now we are, and basically the GSEs, and Joe can speak this more eloquently than I can, but the GSEs have been in conservatorship now for 10 years and generated probably $100 billion or more of profit for the Treasury. There is a movement now to get them out, and a statement about what kind of capitalization would be necessary, but we need to get the mortgage market, I think, over the next few years on much more solid ground, and lessen the dependence. I mean, it's a little bit crazy right now, but again, Joe is right on the Fed. I mean, we're blessed to have the Fed leadership we have.
Fantastic, very interesting. Gentlemen, I'm going to move our topic along now to the forbearance surge, and of course, the running topic for about a month was liquidity. Obviously, we had Dave Stevens on here briefly to talk about that. That storyline seems to have died down. There seems to be an undercurrent of discussion now with the amount of forbearances that there's there's potential at least for a default foreclosure spike down the road. And I'd love to hear both of your comments on that. Is that just idle talk? Do you think there's more to that storyline? What are your thoughts there?
The forbearance issue is very interesting. I think there's 4.3 million homes, homeowners in forbearance right now, and I think they have I think they've extended the non-reaction period to June 30th. It'll be interesting. I think the impact on forbearance is probably a lot of people worried about servicers and whether the servicers' ability to withstand it. They got some backstopping. It'll be interesting, but I think there will be probably an uptick in foreclosures in Q3 and Q4. I don't think it'll be horrible or dramatic, if we continue to have some economic recovery. And the economic recovery doesn't have to be tremendous. It just needs to be steady. And again, I don't think it'll be overwhelming, but it's something to keep an eye on.
Well, unfortunately, the forbearance opportunity gave folks who didn't need the forbearance opportunity take advantage of the forbearance opportunity, which, by the way, that kind of thing happens all the time. I think there are going to be some people really struggling out there who haven't been able to work, who have lost businesses during this time period and so forth. And I believe that we'll see some foreclosure activity associated with that. The question is going to be, are there going to be some deferments made so these folks that are in forbearance allowed to refinance? Typically, if you can't refinance until you bring those payments current, and so I'm wondering whether or not there's going to be some deferrals made so that some of these folks can refinance and bring those payments current through a refinance structure, provided they have the values, et cetera. But I understand why the government did it, but boy, I'll tell you, every time the federal government sticks their nose into something, something happens. I just, somehow, some way, and the industry tends to be cleaning up the mess. We're like the elephant sweepers, back of the parade, sweeping up after the elephants when this happens. But, that's what I think about this forbearance thing.
And I think, Kevin Breeland has a follow-up to that, actually. Kevin, go ahead.
So when we talk about forbearance and foreclosures, do you think there is, in your estimation, based on your experiences, do you think there'll be certain regions of the United States that will be affected more than others? Or do you think it's going to be a more universal problem from coast to coast due to the fact of the amount of unemployment was segmented to really the service industry across the board, no matter whether you lived in Bangor, Maine or Portland, Oregon? It didn't matter.
Well, from my perspective, it has a lot to do with the recovery, and there's been areas of the country that have not sheltered in place to the same degree. We'll have to wait and see if that impacts continued infections and if they continue to have a major problem with the COVID pandemic. And the longer it lasts, the higher the risk of foreclosures increasing. So to the extent that it's regional, it may reflect the practices that were employed to combat the pandemic.
I agree with that. But, the thing that I always concern myself with when we're talking about mortgage lending is I concern myself with appreciative values of properties. We've been through this a number of times. When the values are there, things are good. When values aren't there, it gets worse. And that's the big thing that that I'm worried about right now is the recovery. Is it going to have an impact? And to your point, Kevin, we might see appreciative values decline in certain segments of our country versus other segments of our country, depending on what's going on in that segment of our country. And that may have an impact on it. So, we can always, look, the vast majority of Americans' only asset is their homes. So they're always going to use that asset as a way and a means to be able to buy. And that's what they do. And so we're greatly dependent on the strength of regions in our country and the strength of the values of the properties in our country. And, and I think as long as that holds up, we've got a shot at not seeing a disaster.
Yeah, I'm going to, Joe, you brought up an interesting point there with the the home being the major asset, or in a lot of cases, the single major asset for most Americans. I think Zillow came out and said that they thought home prices would decline 1.2% by October and take another year to recover. And yet in the last week of May, we had resale activity, or excuse me, purchase applications up, 14% higher than a year ago?
Right.
So I think what we're seeing here, to your point, Joe, is that people, actually the value of a home has actually increased from a sentiment point of view, because people in this pandemic have been cooped up. If you're living in an apartment during this pandemic, it's been really painful. And I think people are looking now with more common sense about the asset value of owning a home. So I'm not so sure home prices will go down. I think the demand is going to actually increase.
Well, and to that, I'll add perhaps the extraneous or trite point. Some of the pundits out there, or even folks I've talked to, speak about the pandemic as though it's a complete event. It's over. It's done with. It's gone away by fiat or something. And I would only add that it seems like it's one page in a multi-chapter book. So I appreciate that both of you gentlemen have mentioned that this is, it's not just dead and gone, so to speak. It will continue.
Oh, no.
And the economic recovery could be quite a unique one this time around too. We don't know exactly what it will look like. So
40 million people out of work is a lot of folks out of work.
That's
because of this. So, and look, I think we all hope for, I'll take any type of recovery, V shape, U shape. I don't care what shape it is. I'll take any type of recovery. Just because I think it's needed. And, my brother is my youngest brother is a very, very successful salon owner. And I can tell you what damage this thing did to the people that work in his industry. I mean, it was painful, along with restaurateurs and so forth. That was very painful. And it's going to take them a long time to recover, let's hope that the pandemic, even if it doesn't exist at the level it did before, initially, and people can get back to work a little bit and start feeling better about life itself, because that's where we are right now.
Yeah, amen to that. Gentlemen, I'm going to go to maybe a little more, I don't want to say practical, but a little less on the macro level here. And Joe, you alluded to this very early on, that there weren't a lot of pandemic type plans in place, or, in case of emergency, break glass in the industry. So I'm going to ask this intentionally vaguely, if that's the way to say it. But I'd like to hear both your thoughts on what existing businesses should be doing right now to prepare for whatever's next. And of course, the scary part of that is who knows what's next. But whether that's the continued impact of the pandemic, whether that's a resurgence, whether there's a lot going on in our world right now. It seems more than usual. So, and whether that's a mortgage industry business or a title business or whatnot, what kind of things should they be doing to at least brace for impact? I hate to be negative, but, what do you put behind the glass when you break it,
Well, I said to you before in your program, almost 5 decades in this business, I've learned one thing. In this industry, people are either too busy or too sad. And I think that there aren't a lot of folks in this industry who look out for the what ifs, who look out, how can I better this organization? I mean, most of the industry is all about the sale. It's not about the structure. It's not about how can we reform the structure? How can we make it better? Let's anticipate this and that, because the leadership generally is focused on the immediate, the sale, because it has directly to do with revenue. But nobody's really paying attention to what happens with that revenue. How do we manage that revenue? How do we make this better? How do we make this cheaper? I can tell you, Pat knows that I just sold my title company, and I can tell you over the last 3 years, that title company has made such great strides in technology and efficiency that I was very proud when we actually sold the place, knowing that we handed off an entity that, if they maintained the same protocols that we had put in place, we'll do very, very well with it. But that's something you have to be willing to look forward on. You have to be able to invest in. You have to trial and error, but you're always looking for a better way to do something. And the better way to do something is not just about technology. It's about how do you do something better as it relates to the structure of your organization in preparation of the what ifs.
Patrick, how about yourself?
Well, Joe articulated that very well. I will share with you that I had partial ownership in a couple of companies back in the mid 1980s, and I basically lost everything because I didn't anticipate what was happening, and I didn't see the Mack truck coming down the freeway that ran me over. So since then, I made it a habit of always, at least once a quarter, sitting down and thinking through all the alternatives that I could confront, worst case, best case, and what I actually thought would happen. And then I'd always put together a plan. Now, it does not have to be a detailed plan, but you need to think through how you're going to react to things, because if you wait till they happen, you've got to clear the emotional hurdle. Most inaction in business occurs because the manager can't get off square one. He can't get off home base because he's emotionally confronted with the angst and the issues of laying people off or changing things, and that delays them to the point where they can't react effectively. So my strongest recommendation to everybody would be think through, if things go worse, what are you going to do? If things get better, what are you going to do? And then what do you actually think is going to happen, and how are you going to take advantage of that? Joe articulated very, very well, a lot of good salient points here. I would also just really take a hard look at your relationships with your vendors and your clients. Make sure your clients know you appreciate them. I don't care if you're in sales, you're lending, or you're in the title industry. Reach out to every one of your clients and say, hey, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for what you've done for me in the past, and I want to know if I can do anything for you. But cement those client relationships. Look at your vendors, figure out how you can do things better and more efficiently. Then plan for all contingencies. Again, it doesn't have to be detailed. You just have to have enough of a decision so that you avoid getting bogged down in an emotional status quo type situation.
Let me add something to that, Pat. You made a great point. Most folks don't know what it's like to be hit by a truck until they've been hit by a truck. I have this rub that says that there's a huge portion of our current industry that doesn't know what they don't know, because since 2001 we've been in a refi market, and it still exists today. Now that to me is, mostly anyone can open up a business based off of a refi market. The longevity of this refi market has made people into management environments where they really aren't doing exactly what you said, because they haven't had to. So I think until they've been hit with that truck, until they understand and learn what they don't know, it's going to be it's going to create difficulty for a lot of folks, because they don't know what they don't know, because they haven't felt the pain of guys like us who've been around for a long time, who've been maybe sometimes too much pain in days come by. So,
well, gentlemen, I'm going to go to the opposite side of that coin now. We alluded to a few of these points earlier, but I'm going to come back to you, Pat, for a moment. Of course, we mentioned you founded Williston Financial Group around 2010, kind of in the right in the midst of the recession. And I recall you've done a lot of conferences. You've both done a lot of conference speaking in your career, but a lot of times folks would ask you, privately or at conferences, what are you doing starting a business now when everything's dead? You remember that, right? When they were asked about it, you often mentioned, you'd say, well, that's the best time to start a business or enter an industry in a down market. So, this is certainly a different situation than we had in the Great Recession, but is this a good time to start a business in our industry or bring one in from another industry?
Well, let me put it like this, if I may, back up and just say that, when I commented in 2010 about starting this company, I would tell people that, it's the old buy low, sell high concept, and could buy a lot of assets very inexpensively then. There was a tremendous downturn in the market. A lot of people had to sell. A lot of people were going out of business. So there was ample opportunity to acquire companies. I don't think this one is quite analogous to that. This recession man-made recession. I think this one, though, does present opportunities, and I think the opportunities here are to increase the use of technology and the degree of integration with your clients. And you don't necessarily actually have to do anything, but you have to be willing to look at things, and you have to be willing to embrace things. Again, I recommend to everybody that's listening, reach out to your clients and say, what can we do better? I mean, look at this has brought to everybody's attention that, we have some issues. We have some structural issues in the industry. We have a lack of integration between the participants in the industry. What can we do to overcome that? How can we work together to fix that? And I think there is probably more willingness to collaborate right now than I have seen in my career. We're having conversations that I think are very, very interesting, and I think will be fruitful with clients, embracing integrations and using technology and trying to streamline the process. So there is always opportunities in downturns. This one's a little different than 2009, 2010, but there's opportunities here to excel. There's opportunities to position yourself with your clients in a much more positive manner.
Joe, you've started your share of businesses. You've invested in your share as well. What do you think?
Well, it's funny. As you guys know, I'm 70, and I sold a business in January. I still have a small business in the DC area. And I was saying, I'm really looking forward to just kicking back and taking it easy. And that's a lie.
Yeah.
I'm already thinking about what I can do next. And I think, to Pat's point, this is a great time because there's a lot of things, and I'm not sure exactly what that is, but I am certainly, the radar's up. I'm looking around to see what can happen. I have a lot of very, very talented family members who can do a lot of things and jump in. I'm not so sure that I'm willing to, jump in a ditch with a pick and shovel anymore, but, I'm certainly willing to tell them how to dig that ditch. But I do think this is really an opportune time. And so I've been looking around. I have been looking around.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Well, now I'm going to switch gears, so to speak, pun intended, and talk a little about technology. We've alluded to it a bit. I know both of you have had a big interest in processing technology through the years, and that we are in a very unique industry when it comes to the adoption of new technologies. It would appear, from an outside observer at least, it would appear that we've gone through, if nothing else, maybe an increased adoption of e-mortgage technology on the lender side, especially in the past 2, 3, 4 years. I'll emphasize the word appear because you guys are there and you can tell us. But what more, and Pat, I know you've spoken quite a bit about this, but what more needs to be done? I'd like to focus on the lending side first, but we can come back to some. But are we there yet? Have we, crossed the adoption threshold, or is there a lot more to be done here?
Oh, I think there's a lot more to be done. I think the conversation is being had, the awareness is raised, but I think you'd be stunned at the level of actual engagement in even something like Ron, with a lot of conversations about, but part of it's, in all honesty, part of it's regulation. I mean, the desire to use Ron and the end result of RIN, Avon, the different online technologies for notarization, the desire was overwhelming. The ability to employ it was limited because of regulation and approval. But you are seeing now a really engaged and interesting level of desire on the part of everybody to embrace technology. Has it happened yet? No, it has not. The level of e-closings is still frighteningly low. It's been embraced. We participated in the CFPB program, and I think it was 2015 when they did their test, and we did it with a credit union. And credit unions, because they portfolio the loans, have always had the ability to get involved in e-closing a lot quicker than anybody that's selling loans and needs a wet signature. But I think now you're seeing a desire by a lot of people to look at what they can do, how they can do it. They've got to face sunk costs, but actually profit on mortgages now is up nicely. So I think you are going to see more change. Maybe I'm being a Pollyanna, but I think we're going to see more change now than we've seen in a long time.
No, I totally agree. there's only, and look, I've been pushing e-closings forever. I mean, people get tired of listening to me. And I always wanted the hybrid. Start out with the hybrid. Do the loan package, get the wet signature on the note and mortgage, and deal with it differently. We still don't have a lot of case law about what happens in foreclosure or bankruptcy with e-signatures and things like that. So dip your toe in the water and see how it works out. There's been such a pushback with people. We can't change this. We can't do that. Bertha in the back room doesn't want to do that. She wants to touch paper. You hear all that stuff, right? I think this pandemic has brought more to light on what's needed. And that generally is what happens in the industry when something traumatic happens. It forces people to do things that they haven't been able to do. The only thing I will say about technology that's always bugged me about technology is the fact that every day you can go out and read, oh, this company has built this, that company has built that, this one offers this one offers. It's such a fragmented menu of things that doesn't seem to fit together to make one continuous continuum, that works. I mean, everybody has a little piece, but nothing is and that's what makes it so difficult to engage with, because it's piecemeal and nothing fits. You have to figure out, so I think that as time goes on, the technology and the thought process of figuring out how, especially in the lending market, how do we take this process and string it together so it's seamless? Even if we're using numerous pieces of different technology, but they all integrate together well. I think that's the frustration I've always had with technology. Not saying that there hasn't been some great stuff built, but how do you engage it and how do you utilize it in your operation? That's always been the issue that I've wondered.
That's a great question, and I'll jump in there, Brian. When we were writing about this kind of thing in e-signatures 20 years ago, we heard two things. And one of the things was, well, e-signatures are dangerous because they haven't been tested in court, which I'm hearing again for remote online notary. And the other thing we heard was that every lender wanted an all-in-one system, but no lender would trust just one vendor with their mission-critical tech. So how do we get past these things? What do you think this is a big enough shock to our system to really put lenders in the driver's seat so that they demand the tech they need now? Or is it going to continue to be kind of this slow float to adoption?
Well, if I may, I'll tell you that I think there'll be change. Do I think it's going to be a big enough issue to command 100% change or significant change? No, I don't. Part of it, the reality is everybody in the real estate process looks at everybody else as a vendor. Everybody has a lot of sunk cost already in their system. So they have got to see and be able to model out a return on making a significant change. That plus regulation slows the level of change down dramatically. I do think right now that you're seeing lenders, I don't want to say eliminate, I'll just say be more selective in their vendor selection. They are looking at their vendors harder and eliminating the amount of vendors they have, probably to a degree I haven't seen in my career. Are they going to get just totally exclusive? No, but they're going to make sure that whoever they do business with can survive, as Joe said, that they have a pandemic plan, that they have good cybersecurity, and one of the things that's happened in the title industry because of the shutdown in India, now everybody wants to make sure that you have the ability to maintain your business and produce no matter what happens, so that you're not dependent on outsourcing everything, that you have proper backups. So people are now getting more conscious of evaluating their partners. So that will lead to more consolidation and embracing technology in those situations.
Again, being in a predominantly refinanced market for many, many years would be an opportune time, because the refi, whether it's a VA Earl or FHA Streamline or conventional, they're relatively simplistic structures. I would say 75% of them go through without much of an issue. I mean, you got that 20-25% where you got to mine it a little bit to make it work, and there's a little bit more effort. But this is a time when people should really be looking at what can I do with my infrastructure during this simplistic time to make it even to get ready for what's coming. In other words, when Pat and I were started in the business, there was no refinance. It was purchase, right? And maybe some home equity, but it was all purchase. I mean, we're talking about some of the toughest transactions you had to do it. When people aren't prepared for that, and I'm not saying across the board. I'm saying there's a large portion of our industry that isn't prepared for cash out refinances or purchase transactions or whatever it might be. And those are going to take a little bit more and a lot more. And you know what really just kills me is we're going to try to solve the problem with fixed cost. And there is nothing worse that you can do for your business is trying to solve the problem with fixed cost. Because all it does is demolishes your margins. And, so I hope that we soon take some opportunity during this time with these refis to figure out how we can do it better and do more with the same or do more with less. And I think I've never been a fan of fixed cost. I've always been people get sick of me because I'm always talking about fixed costs. But as Pat knows, there's nothing worse than having a lot of fixed costs to destroy your margins. So that's where I believe where I am on that point.
Wow. Well, some great points there, gentlemen. In the time we have left here, I know you're both very busy gentlemen, so I want to just briefly touch. As we prepared for this podcast, Patrick, I think I brought up a point about Ron, and my impression, naive as perhaps I am, was that, at least reading the headlines, you'd come to believe that remote online notarizations were sweeping the nation. And you had some interesting thoughts on that. I wonder if I could take you back to that. Is Ron being adopted as widely as we might be led to believe, or is it just a good story right now, or somewhere in between?
Nowhere near the level of conversation, for sure. I did a survey about 2 weeks ago, and it was less than 5% of all the closings that we handled. So I think I don't think it's gotten the adoption. There's been a lot of questions about, as Joe mentioned earlier, if you have a foreclosure or if you what's the legal ramifications? Because I think there's 33 or 34 states now that either have legalized it or have the temporary provisions. There's been some edicts. California is a state that you can't do it in, and then there's questions in some states if the notary is licensed in another state, whether or not there's just all sorts of permeations to this that have really slowed down adoption. And then there's capacity issues. There are vendors out there, but they have capacity issues. So every mobile notary in the country is overbooked. It's crazy. So no, it has not gotten the level of engagement is a fraction of the level of conversation.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would agree. I've not been a fan of the Ron because I believe a dramatic change to the industry like the e-closing component. I'm still a big fan of the hybrid. I think that we to get a lender's feet wet and build confidence. Having the hybrid work on your behalf to get used to is certainly a predecessor, for maybe a Ron someday. But right now, I think if we could just get folks to embrace, the hybrid, I think we could move along really, really well. But that's still not even happening right now. But I do think that there are people talking about the hybrid, and but we'll have to wait and see what happens.
Well, gentlemen, we're going to go now. We've just got a little time left here. And I would be terrible at this little job of mine if I didn't ask this question before we closed out. So I'm going to ask each of you, 2020 has already been, to put it mildly, a strange year in lots of ways. And we're not even really halfway through it yet. So I'm going to ask you, and you can get it as big as you like, or we can keep it to the industry. I'm going to ask you to pull out your crystal balls and tell me what the rest of 2020 looks like. At least some mention of the industry, of course, but what do you see coming in the next 6-7 months? Let's not forget, we've got a national election coming in November, and without making this a political conversation by any means, those have been known to have a little impact on the industry as well too. So, what's coming in the next 6 to 12 months?
Who do you want to go first?
Whoever speaks first.
Good, Pat.
All right. So, starting with the real estate industry, I think we are, again, as Joe mentioned earlier, very blessed with a proactive and aggressive Fed under Chairman Powell. And so consequently, I think interest rates are going to be low for at least another year. And that will facilitate real estate activity throughout this year. And I don't think the real estate activity will be necessarily impacted by the presidential election. I do think the economy as a whole will recover. People ask me what I think, and I say I don't know any more than anybody else knows. But I will tell you that I am in my planning process. I've got a best case, a worst case, and the most, in my opinion, the most logical case. The most logical case I'm looking at is a 90% recovery. And that means we come back to 90% of the economy. The last 10% is contingent on getting some sort of medical cure for the COVID-19 virus, either an antiviral medicine or a vaccine, but something that actually gets us the last 10%. And by the 10%, I'm talking about those activities that are focused on large gatherings and interactions. Those will be inhibited until we get that medical solution. So 90% recovery by year end. I see unemployment getting down to about 10% or maybe even a little bit under 10% by year end. I see real estate doing really well. I see leisure and travel and those activities still being impacted until we have a medical solution.
Joe,
I think, first of all, I think the 10-year is going to stay low for the next year or two. I believe that because it almost has to at this stage of the game. I mean, and I don't mean that because someone's making it that low, but I just think the circumstances are going to, require it to be in the position it is. So there's always going to be a favorable mortgage environment out there to be able to lend in. And I think that's going to be the case. I don't think the election is going to come into play here with the mortgage industry. I think values are going to stay where they need to stay. It all depends on the economy. It all depends on the consumer because, consumption drives our GDP. I mean, if we don't have consumption, we don't have much of a GDP. The mortgage industry has always been, and historically it was, 17, 18% of GDP, and I think it's down to 11 or 12% of GDP. So, and this is a result of the 2008 issue that we saw GDP numbers drop as it relates to the impact of real estate and the mortgage industry on GDP. But I really think it's going to be how many people get back to work sooner versus later. And if we can get people back to work sooner versus later, I think we're going to continue we'll be fine. But right now, that's my biggest concern. 2.5 million in May. Well, I'm really interested to see what happens in June. Are we going to see as many in June, or is that going to fall off? There are some industries, and the other thing we're faced with right now is again here again. The government says they're going to do something, and they do it. And what's happening now is that, and I just talked to some folks that I know at the Marriott Corporation, and they said we can't get our people back to work. They're making too much money on unemployment. Again, a problem that, they thought they were doing the right thing. We're going to give them the unemployment. We're going to give them more money on unemployment. And a lot of folks are saying, I'm not ready to go back to work. My daughter's complaining to me all the time because she's still with the company saying, Dad, people are saying, I'd be interested in that job in 90 days when my unemployment runs out. Or, well, see that. If that's the mindset, it's going to be a little bit tougher to get people back to work, especially in certain industries. And I think that's what it's going to depend on, getting people back to work and the willingness for people to get back to work. And, I find it, I think it's a wonderful thing when you're trying to feed your family that somebody's saying, here, let me help you. But if there's opportunity for you to go back to work, I think you should be going back to work and make a contribution to, just making an overall contribution. So right now, I think it's going to be get back to work and how this economy recovers.
Well, gentlemen, I'll tell you what, we've covered a lot of ground in a short period of time today. And It's really been, I only wish I brought my popcorn with me. I've learned a lot myself today. It's always a pleasure. We're going to go ahead and wrap it up at this point. As always, I want to thank my compatriots, Rick Grant, Kevin Breeland. Patrick Stone, if anyone would like to reach out to you after seeing this podcast, what's the best way to reach you?
My email, pstone@willistonfinancial.com.
And we'll include that in the show notes. And Joe Murin, if anyone wants to reach out to you, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, my email, jmurin49@gmail.com.
All right. Gentlemen, I can't thank you enough for joining us. There's a lot of ground we weren't even able to get to. Maybe we'll have you back on again and do this again.
Be our pleasure. My pleasure,
Exactly.
anyway, for sure.
Well, thank you so much. It's been fantastic.
Thanks a lot.
And
Pat, good seeing you again.
Good seeing you, Joe. Take care, buddy.
You do the same, bud.
And with that, you don't know this, guys, but we recorded this on a second-generation iPad, and I think my daughter was playing with it. So we're running out of battery. With that, Mr. Grant, take us home.